guys, day one of free agency is kind of winding down, it seems. So we wanted to kind of give you guys our overall thoughts on just some guys, some players and positions of need for the Indianapolis Colts that we feel like the Colts should potentially at least be looking to potentially sign and bring in on their roster. So we have kind of some of the positions of need that we feel like overall there are definitely 5 positions of need. The Colts need to bring in a guy that would make major impact in some sort of way. And we have another position that we think they just need to add maybe another player for depth purposes and such. So we're going to start here with quarterback. Now, I'm going to be honest, Derek, out of every single position group here, quarterback's probably the least intriguing, the least enticing. There's not really a whole lot of big names here. I think the biggest guy here in terms of names and being linked to the Colts is Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, right now, as it stands, he's still under contract with the 49ers, so the Colts would have to trade some sort of pick. It seems like his trade value, though, has been going down the last couple of days, but there still is the issue of, first off, he has that injury on his throwing shoulder, and second off, he also has that massive contract, and he's also only has one more year on his deal. So there's some perks, there's some drawbacks with this guy. What are your thoughts on a guy like Jimmy G potentially to the Indianapolis Colts?
Yeah, only if they ate some of his contract and lowered that draft asking price, because apparently from what it sounded like is his trade value has gone down quite a bit, apparently. So that's a good news for anyone that's looking to sign him. Only then would I feel comfortable in doing that. Because again, if you're signing Jimmy Garoppolo, you're basically saying he's going to be the guy for the next few years. And I just don't want to accept that unless we get a better end of the deal.
Yeah, I mean, there's like the contract. I would hate to take on that big contract when you just got rid of the one with Carson Wentz. Why would you pick up another contract? I think the only way I would realistically take this, Derek, is honestly, I guess there's 2 ways that I would say. First off is if you give like a 4th to 5th rounder at the most, and then the 49ers have to take some of that, cap as well from that Jimmy Garoppolo contract. And, you only sign him for a year or so, but then you think if you trade for him, you'll probably try to extend him. So I'm not really like huge on that. I'm not a big fan of that. I think the second thing would be if they end up outright cutting him for some reason. I know there's been talks around that potentially happening. If they cut him, the Colts sign him for like a year. He's kind of that stopgap guy for one season at least. And then, you potentially trade up in the draft next year and you go get your guy, or maybe you trade up this year if you fall in love with one of these prospects and you find your quarterback, right? That would be kind of the 2 scenarios I would see here for Jimmy. Probably B is a more enticing because you're not giving up draft capital. You can kind of control how much you're paying him, right? You don't have to pay him that massive contract, hopefully. So those would be kind of my thoughts on that as well. The other name that I think is the guy that's on the market that probably has the most intrigue and probably the highest ceiling is Jameis Winston. Former very high pick, number 1 overall pick from the Tampa Bay Bucks a number of years ago. He was with the Saints the last 2 years. Obviously, he got injured last year when he took over for Drew Brees, but he had a pretty nice season in those 7 that he did play. So now you wonder, first off, do the Saints want to bring him back? And second off, if they don't, what's his contract going to look like? Is he going to want a multi-year deal kind of thing? Because knowing how desperate teams are for quarterbacks and how dry the quarterback market is right now, if you get Jameis, are you going to have to sign him to a big contract? That's my question. Ideally, you'd want to only sign him to like a 1-year contract, right? And then kind of see if he pans out when we assign him to an extension next year. But I don't know if that's realistically a thing that would happen, So what are your thoughts on the Colts potentially being interested in Jameis Winston as their next quarterback?
I think I would enjoy it. It'd be good to see Jameis Winston, continue to revitalize his career in a place like Indianapolis. He's got the arm to be able to handle anything in Reich's handbook, and I think he's matured a lot. I've mentioned that before. I think he's matured quite a bit over the last few years, spending that with Sean Payton and Drew Brees. I think it's humbled him a little more. And I think that he would fit really well into the system because he would, it's what's the worst thing that could happen? You stink with him sometime, but at other times you may think that he, could be a really good quarterback for you. I mean, in the few games that he got to start last year, he actually played relatively well with, the Saints. So, I think it'd be fine to give him a chance. It just, like you said, depend on the contract.
It would really depend on that. Yeah, is somebody willing? Because there's a couple teams that are still searching for their quarterback, right? So, like, would a team be willing to potentially, sign him to a big deal, more that's outside of Ballard's comfort zone in terms of a quarterback contract and stuff like that? So that would be a big question mark there. And then there are some other potential talks of, like Derek Carr being traded. I don't know how realistic that is at this point. And then there was Marcus Mariota was a name that was kind of thrown around. I think we both kind of decided we would be kind of like meh on Marcus Mariota. Obviously he was very talented when he came out of college and stuff, but he's, been a backup for a number of years, and he's been kind of fragile in his NFL career at this point. So I wouldn't really be super intrigued with Marcus Mariota. I think that'd be more of a maybe even drafting a guy this year if you were to go that route. Or you just stick with him, you see what you got, and you go, you don't re-sign him. At any rate, he would be a stopgap guy for sure. And there's really nobody else that comes to mind at the quarterback position that you really would care about. Obviously, Deshaun Watson's not happening. We just saw that news come out very soon that the Texans wouldn't even let the Colts talk to Deshaun Watson. So, all right, let's move on now to left tackle. Let's stay on the offensive side. Now, this market actually recently has added another kind of talented guy, with Lael Collins of the Cowboys likely to be released. He's 28 years old. He played right tackle, but he does have some experience at left tackle playing as well. So you think, okay, he's out of all these guys, he's the youngest guy. Who knows how much he's going to command, but if he doesn't command too awfully much, he could be a guy that you sign to kind of help figure out that left tackle issue you've had for the last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some good options here. And, Lael Collins, is another one that we just recently heard. He'd be the cheapest option when you're looking at this left tackle group, at least from that standpoint. There's other guys, but, when we're looking at trying to find a guy here that's actually going to improve the pass blocking rather than what Eric Fisher wasn't able to do last year, Dwayne Brown, another one, again, probably not he's not going to be your long-term solution, but as a short-term solution, he definitely fits the mold. And Armstead, I mean, again, his market's probably really freaking big. I don't know if the Colts would be able to even muster up the money to be able to afford to pay him. He's probably going to get over $20 million a year. And, we're already in cap hell when it comes to the offensive line. So we'll see if that changes or not.
Yeah, I mean, they could. Like, they have the most cap space in the NFL. They certainly could. But my question is it wise to do so? Is it wise to invest? If you sign him for $20 million, over $70 million in your offensive line alone, that just makes no sense to me why you would do that with all the other needs that are a lot more immediate. Why would you sign a guy to that massive contract? It's not like he's 25 years old either. He's 30 years old. He has a little bit of injury history too. He's not a perfect tackle guy here that you would sign. So as a player, certainly he's talented. He's one of the best tackles in the league, but overall, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense with what you're trying to do. It just doesn't add up to me. So I would say probably Dwayne Brown's probably the cheapest option, and he's more of a Band-Aid guy too. Lael Collins would be the only thing that would be, potential for your future, but I don't even know there. Is he willing to even switch back to left tackle? That would be a question mark. All right, let's move on now. Stay with offense. Talk about these wide receivers. Now, this market has severely diminished the last couple weeks here with a couple guys getting tagged, being brought back, but there still are a couple names of note. Allen Robinson, the big one, right? Allen Robinson's a guy that, was with the Bears for a number of years, never really got an opportunity to shine because of the quarterback play, but he still is a very good receiver, kind of had a down year last year. But we just saw with the Christian Kirk signing, Allen Robinson might be getting a lot of money in free agency. If that's what Christian Kirk will get paid, who knows how much that reset the market at wide receiver in free agency. There are some other names as well, Eric. A couple interesting guys that we can just slightly mention. DJ Chark, probably the second best wide receiver left in free agency at this point. He's a very talented player. He's very young. I know the Colts have been linked to him in different situations and stuff like that. Jarvis Landry just got released from the Browns. That's another name. I know you don't like Juju, but I got to mention him because he's available. Still young as well. And then Jamison Crowder is a guy that's interesting as well. Signed with the Jets a number of years ago. He's a free agent. He's 28 years old. What are your thoughts on all these other guys that we just talked about?
Chark, I know with the injuries, that's kind of a scary thing for a lot of people. But again, Chark is that young, explosive guy that you think you could still get a lot out of. Jarvis Landry, again, I think is a very consistent wide receiver. He's definitely a hands guy. Just my only thing is I don't think Landry wants to come to Indianapolis because I think he actually wants to go to a team that actually has its quarterback situation figured out. And right now that's not fitting the mold. You know how much I don't like Juju. I'm not going to mention it again because I hate Juju. Either way, Jamison Crowder is another one. I kind of been mentioning his name a few times over the last few years, but we just never seem to get him. So Chark, I like. Landry, I like. I just don't think he's going to come to Indianapolis. And the other two, I just couldn't care.
Okay. All right, let's move on to tight end now. Now, this market has also gotten a couple guys off the board here recently, but I thought we should mention a couple guys because there still are at least two guys that I would be comfortable if the Colts were to bring in. That's Gerald Everett and Robert Tanyan, both tight ends that have had some upside, have had some good seasons in the league. And you got a guy that's more of a project in O.J. Howard. And Tyler Conklin, I think, is an underrated guy that nobody talks about in free agency. But I thought he put up numbers with Minnesota last year. What are your thoughts on the tight ends?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you, Gerald Everett and Robert Tanyan. Those are the two guys that have consistently been pretty good throughout their careers, and they're guys that definitely could add a receiving element to this team. O.J. Howard, I would definitely say, is a low risk, potentially high reward guy. He's got definitely got the intangibles to be a good tight end in this league. It's just a matter of how the Colts would actually use him if he even went here.
Yep, exactly. All right, let's move on now to the defensive guys. This is the most important position I think the Colts need to address. Will they address this is their question. We'll see exactly what happens there. But your guy, Chandler Jones, we got to talk about him because you have him in all caps here. He, I think, is your clear number one. If there's any guy you want the Colts to sign, it's Chandler Jones at this point.
Chandler freaking Jones. Go and get the guy. I've been saying it ever since I heard he was going to be a free agent. Please go and get Chandler Jones. That guy will immediately make your defensive line a whole heck of a lot better. Had 5 sacks in the first game against the Tennessee Titans, man. This guy can flat out ball. Please go get him. Ballard, please.
Please don't be cheap. For the one time in your life, Chris Ballard, please don't be cheap.
And Chandler Jones doesn't even care about money. He just mainly says he wants to go to a place where he feel like he can get better and actually feel valued. And, I mean, if that also means throwing a little extra money in there, then please do.
Ballard, I'm only going to have so much patience for you when you keep saying pass rush needs to be improved if you're not going to take the opportunity to sign a guy like Chandler Jones. Like cap space is not an issue. You could sign him if you really wanted to, but if you're not going to do it and the pass rush is awful, that's on you, bro. And I can't help you. It's all my pent up anger that I have right now with the Colts' lack of doing anything in free agency right now. But let's keep going here. Let's talk about Zadaria Smith. He was a former Green Bay Packer. He was a captain on this team. He was injured last year, but the 2 seasons prior, Derek, he had 13.5 sacks and 12.5 sacks respectively. So he's a guy that can get after the quarterback too, and he's a couple years younger than a Chandler Jones. What are your thoughts on Zadaria Smith?
Well, I think he's definitely a great player for all the reasons you just mentioned. He can get in the backfield for sure. I think the one thing that also gives him an edge that you didn't mention is, this guy is a tremendous player and a tremendous leader on the field as well. And I give credit to some of the other Packers podcast girls that I follow on Twitter. I follow quite a few of them, and they mentioned Zadaria Smith several times today and talked about how, when Zadarius Smith got there, along with some of these other guys, he really made that Green Bay Packers defense a real thing again. Not just because of him, but because, his effort, his energy, his enthusiasm, his juice that he brings on the field is something that is very contagious. And it's something that, this Colts locker room really could use, right? He's a veteran, but he still has that juice in him. And, when Darius Leonard mentioned that the Colts kind of got complacent at several times when it came to that, Zadarius Smith would be a guy that would not allow that to happen. That's not going to be allowed on Zadarius Smith's watch. And I think that would be a great thing for this young defense for this team. I think that Zadarius Smith, do I want him as much as Chandler Jones? No, but Zadarius Smith, I would not complain at all getting Zadarius Smith. I think he's a great player. I think he's a great man. I think he's a great leader. I think he's everything that the Colts would want in a defensive lineman or a pass rusher.
Yeah, and you need a guy. You need a veteran on your defensive ends. You don't have one right now at all. Like, you need a guy that can help train up these young two guys that you just drafted. And if you have him and Quiddy on both sides, I mean, I've talked about this before, but tell me a position on this defense that you seriously need to address if you address defensive end. I can't really think of one. So then your focus doesn't have to be, we have to figure out all these positions in the draft. You can do yourself a favor. You can figure out pass rush now, and then you can go address your passing offense that you've said is not good enough. You can go do that in the draft. You can put all your chips in there and figure it out if you really want to. Now, it goes back to the same thing I said about Chandler Jones. He's a guy that's on the market. He's available. You can afford him. It's like almost to the fact you've tried to draft guys, multiple guys on this defensive line with very, very little in return to look for it now. It's time to address it, Chris. It's time to address a position that you have frankly whiffed on at this point. You've invested so much draft capital in this position only to be bottom half of the league in sacks every single year.
Right.
When does it end? When does the insanity end? That's my question. Right. You have a chance. And Derek, if he does not do anything here, I'm getting close to being out on Chris Ballard. I know that's insane for people, and they're going to call me all sorts of names. But if you're just going to straight up ignore one of the most important positions in football when you could go get one of these guys, that's negligence. You are hurting your football team.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care anymore what people think about this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're totally 100% right. I mean, and I get into these arguments all the time about what position's more important. The only thing I keep saying is defensive end, just simply because of the fact that, like you said before, Ballard has tried and tried and tried and tried to find a defensive end that is going to work in this system, and it has not worked. He has failed every time, except for Kwity Paye and Dio Odangbo. We don't know yet. We just simply don't know yet. But again, they are young. They're going to be second-year players, and we can't rely on them to carry the team just yet. It is time to go and get guys that will actually make an immediate impact that you do not need to coach up. That's the difference here. And it's right. You're right, because that's something that has continuously hurt this defense year in and year out, is not having a consistent pass rush. Having a guy like Chandler Jones or having a couple guys like that would be so huge. So coaching up these young guys, growing some maturity in that locker room, especially on the defensive side. And again, in that fourth quarter, when you need that big play, you have someone on that one side that is going to demand attention. And if you don't demand him attention, he's going to make the other team pay. And that's what you need.
I've said this before, Derek. I'm going to say it again. The Colts will constantly be blowing leads. They're going to constantly be doing what they did in Baltimore. They're going to be doing what they did in Tampa. They're going to be doing, insert. There's so many games you could point to, so many blown leads. If they cannot get consistent pressure, they're going to continue to blow leads. They're going to continue to do that. And like, at the end of the day, if Chris Ballard scratches his head mid-season, why does this keep happening? You had an opportunity if you didn't sign these guys. You had a chance to do it, and you just didn't. And that's on you, man. That's on you. I can't tell you, I can't. That to me is the only possible answer to that question. Is like you've just put your head in the sand and you just ignored it. And if they continue to ignore it, it's going to be their demise, Derek. I'm not even kidding anymore. Like, we've had a lot of grace with Chris Ballard. We have a lot of grace with this team, but not anymore, because it's time to actually do something in free agency. You have over $70 million. You can afford to at least get one stud pass rusher. They don't come along often to hit the free agent market. So you have an opportunity to really upgrade. And if you don't do that, I mean, we're going to get the same results we got last year. I'm sorry, but we are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right. There's my rant. You guys have heard it. This is pent-up frustration. I'm getting it out. This is therapeutic for me. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. All right. Let's talk about corner. This is a position that, we don't necessarily feel like the Colts need to go crazy for. They don't need to, throw the bank at this position, but we think they could potentially be good to bring in another veteran or two. And there's a couple names here of note, a couple guys I don't necessarily think would be in the Colts market, but we'll talk about them anyway. Stefan Gilmore, Patrick Peterson are two guys, a little bit older vet corners in the league. Maybe he'll get a little bit more money. One guy that I think could be a realistic opportunity for the Colts to sign is Casey Hayward, because last year he played in Vegas with Gus Bradley. So he has that connection with this defense. What are your thoughts on some of the corners here that the Colts could potentially sign?
Yeah, Patrick Peterson and Casey Hayward, definitely two guys that I think could really fit into this Colts cornerback mold. Some veterans that I think really play that defense really well. Jason Veretz, another one that could be interesting for me. I know he's had issues with injuries, but he has been a guy that when he's in there, he plays really good man-to-man defense, plays really well, and again, a veteran as well. Yeah, I mean, like you said, the cornerback position for us, we're mainly looking for depth purposes because there's really not a big name guy on the market. Stefan Gilmore, I expect to fully get something from him because, he's one of the bigger name guys, even though he's a little older. So, but yeah, a couple good veteran guys out here that I think the Colts could definitely take advantage of, especially Casey Hayward.
Yep. And that's kind of the positions that we think the Colts need to potentially address here in free agency. Now, there may be a couple that you're like, I think they should look at this player. They should invest in this position. Let us know in the comments below. That'll do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, all your support, all that good stuff. Be sure to follow us for if the Colts decide to actually make a move, we'll be on it. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, guys, go Colts.